As Martha screamed, a pair of hands came out of nowhere, catching her by the shoulders. "What is it?" Connor's face was eerily distorted in the half-light. As Martha shrank back from him, he pressed his face to the glass, stared a moment, and then steered her to the side of her bed. "It's the Scarecrow." "What?" "The one from the porch. Someone sure went to a lot of trouble for a joke." Martha wrapped her arms around herself. "Where's Dad?" They couldn't sleep. They went for a drive. He squatted down on the floor in front of her. "What happened?" "It was horrible." Martha buried her face in her hands. "Didn't you hear it ringing? The phone call? What he said?" "Who?" "I don't know." "What then?" It was deep, kind of throaty. "Throaty?" Connor nodded, mouthing the word again to himself. Like he needed to clear his throat. Like he was having trouble getting air. Sort of choking. "He told me to look outside, and then he said, 'Trick or treat.'" "Trick or treat?" Connor stared hard at the floor. "What is it? What are you thinking?" Martha tensed. "I'm thinking, what a fool he is. It's not even Halloween yet." "Stop making fun of me." "I'm not making fun of you. Why would I make fun of you?" She saw the look then, Connor's look, creeping slowly across his face, and she shook her head, too upset to argue. Connor crossed to the window again and stared out into the night. He wasn't wearing a shirt, just rumpled jeans. He ran one head through his thick, tawny hair. "I'll get rid of that thing in the morning. And if the phone rings again, don't answer it. Let me answer it. It's probably just some kids being cute, but don't answer it anyway." Martha shut her eyes. "It just figures." "What does?" "That something else would happen in this stupid house. I don't know why your mother ever picked it out to begin with." "Well," Connor mulled over, "I guess because she was trying to please your father." Martha looked daggers at him. Dad was pleased in Chicago. This time, Connor turned around, leveling a stare straight at her. "You're really having a problem with their happiness, aren't you?" What?" "Don't you tell me what I feel." He nodded. "Okay then, here's the scenario. Two lonely people find each other and have a brand new chance at life. Enter one spoiled brat who—" "Get out," Martha snapped. "Just get out of my room. The room where something terrible happened." He gave a smile. "You." He just managed to duck out the door as Martha's purse crashed into the wall, missing his head but spilling its contents all over the floor. For a long time she huddled there, trying not to think about the phone call, trying not to look out the window. That breathing, trick or treat. But of course Connor had to be right. With Halloween coming up, it was only natural for kids to play jokes, especially on the new people in town. A prank? That's all it was. But as Martha slid back beneath the covers, she couldn't shake her feeling of dread. That sense of tragedy was still lurking here in the room, just at the edge of her senses, wrapped up in the cold. It seemed she had scarcely dozed off before she woke again, this time to gray daylight, and the faraway sound of thunder. Great, Martha thought, sound effects to match the house. She peered timidly from the window, but the Scarecrow was gone. Pulling on jeans and a sweatshirt, she followed the smell of burnt bacon down to the kitchen. "Isn't it a glorious day?" Sally looked up from a counter full of dirty pots and pans and smiled out at the threatening rain clouds. "Did you sleep well?" So Connor hadn't said anything about last night. Martha felt strangely relieved. "I was really tired." "Where's Connor?" "I think he's filling the wood box out back." As Sally waved her spoon, a yellow sauce glopped all over the floor. Martha sidestepped it and tried not to shudder. "Breakfast is nearly done. Will you tell him?" "Sure." Martha secretly wondered how Connor had managed to grow so tall and healthy on his mother's cooking, and the thought almost made her laugh. A damp wind blew across the back stoop, and Martha stood there shivering. Trees crowded close on all sides, and the tiny yard was choked with weeds and dead leaves. For the first time, she was keenly aware of just how isolated they really were. There was a subtle movement at the edge of the clearing, and Connor stepped out from the woods, his arms stacked with logs. Martha waited while he came up onto the porch and dropped them into a box by the door. He brushed his hands together and smiled off towards the tangled tree line. "It's nice back in there. You can hear the forest just living around you." Martha followed his eyes, seeing nothing but bare brown ugliness. "I don't hear anything. It's so empty." "Huh. You're just not listening." He stepped off the porch and flexed his arms. After a minute, Martha stepped down beside him. "You didn't tell them about last night. Did you want me to?" Martha studied his face, the deep blue of his eyes. Dad probably would have laughed. He thinks I imagine things. Yes, I got that feeling. But I don't imagine things, I mean. The hint of a smile came to life behind his eyes. I know. Well, Sally said we're ready to eat. Connor rolled his eyes and put one hand protectively to his stomach. It's the country air. It always makes her adventurous. And then, at Martha's surprised look, don't worry, this phase too will pass. He went into the kitchen, leaving Martha to stare after him. The moving van arrived shortly after 3 for the rest of the afternoon. Martha was too busy carrying and unpacking boxes to worry about anything else. Although the house began to take on some semblance of normalcy, Martha couldn't seem to make her own room any more appealing, even with all of her old things, familiar things. Frustrated with her wasted efforts, she finally gave up and found Connor lounging against one of the columns on the front porch. What's the verdict? He asked without looking up. Think you'll stay a while? Do I have a choice? His eyes lifted, touched her face. She thought she saw a twinkle there, but she couldn't be sure. If I had a choice, She broke off as Dad stuck his head out the door and tossed his keys at them. Would you mind going for picture hooks? We're having a crisis in here. Connor nodded and started towards the station wagon. Why don't you take Martha along? Dad added. Show her the town, if she wants. Martha didn't relish the idea of being with Connor, but at least it was a way to get out of the house. She just managed to scramble in as the car started down the drive. Now Martha could see the route they'd come last night. Dirt road, dense woods, and the endless sweep of spent fields beneath a leaden sky. She wondered how Sally had even found this place at all. Have you been to town a lot? She glanced at Connor's profile, the frayed collar of his blue flannel shirt. Twice, maybe. Don't get your hopes up. It's not Chicago. What about the people? What about them? Well, are they friendly? His shoulders moved lazily. I don't know. Nobody talked to me. She couldn't tell if he was teasing or not. For the rest of the ride, she kept her attention on the bleak landscape and made breath patterns on the window. They drove for nearly 20 minutes before Connor finally turned onto another road, this one taking them past neat frame houses and well-tended yards, and quiet sidewalks littered with colorful leaves. From nearly every house, jack-o'-lanterns grinned back at them, and windows were papered with skeletons, witches, and ghosts. Where is everyone? The deserted streets were growing long with shadows, and Martha frowned. Connor kept his eyes on the road. Sensible people are fixing their dinners now, preferably something edible, not looking for picture hooks. And where were we going to find these picture hooks? Connor swerved neatly into a parking lot and switched off the ignition. Hardware store? While Connor hunted along the dusty counters, Martha wandered up and down the aisles, wondering if the rest of the town was outdated as this shop. Other than a man at the register and a girl on a ladder at the back of the store, she and Connor seemed to be the only people around. She spied an old mirror propped on a shelf and leaned close to inspect its dingy glass. And then she saw the smeared reflection above her shoulder, and she froze. She hadn't heard anyone walk up, but the boy was right behind her, his body rigid, his dark eyes wide, an expression of pure shock locking his handsome features in. Alarmed, Martha spun to face him, but as his gaze bored into her, he seemed to mentally shake himself, and he stepped back. Now, Martha realized all he looked was incredibly embarrassed. Sorry, he stammered. From the back, I mean. I thought you were someone else. Hey, I'm really sorry. Are you finding what you need? He was still staring, and Martha felt her cheeks beginning to burn. The boy's smile widened, warm and genuine. Picture hooks, Martha. They're called picture hooks, remember? Connor hissed. He appeared out of nowhere, sighed, and shook his head at her. Martha turned even redder. Hooks? Sure, back in the counter. Hey, Win, the boy yelled, and the girl on the ladder climbed down. Find some picture hooks, will you? Martha glanced back to see the girl studying her, but the boy repeated his request more urgently this time, and the girl hurried into a back room. The boy's eyes settled back on Martha and stayed there, politely curious. I haven't seen you around, have I? Connor made a noise in his throat and walked away. Martha wanted to die. No, you couldn't have. I haven't been here. Straighten up, Martha. What I mean is, I just got here. Brilliant. What a profound statement. To town. His smile was so wonderful that Martha couldn't help smiling back. You mean you just moved here? Yes, Martha brightened. Yesterday, sort of. Sort of? He laughed and his eyes flicked down over her body to her feet and back again. I'm Blake Chambers. Martha Stevenson. She stuck her hand out awkwardly and his fingers closed around it. Nice to meet you. In fact, you're the first person I've met here. Great, then I'll be the official welcoming committee. So where do you live anyway? I don't remember any houses being for sale around town. Well, we're really not in town, Martha brushed self-consciously at a stray wisp of hair. It's a big old house, sort of out in the country. I don't really know my way around yet, but her voice trailed off as his smile faded, then seemed to recover itself. For one crazy instant, she could almost have sworn he looked frightened. Not the old Bedford place. Martha shook her head. I don't know. I didn't know it had a name. But his smile was back, warm and irresistible. Sure, everyone knows the old Bedford house. I'd say your work's cut out for you. He glanced back at Connor, who was sorting through a shoebox the girl held for him. Your boyfriend? Who, Connor? Martha spun around flustered. No, he's... I know, Blake teased. You're just good friends. Friends, thought Martha ironically. We're not even that. But aloud she said, our parents just got married. To each other, I mean. God, Martha, could you sound any stupider? Wow, new family, new town? That's really tough. Oh, well, it's okay. Martha gave a shy smile. Do you work here? Not if I can help it. His laugh was easy. My uncle owns the place. Win back there, she's my cousin. I'm just helping out today. Martha nodded and tried to think of something to say, but Blake saved her. Look, I've got to get out of here. I'm late already. Nice meeting you. I'll probably see you at school, huh? I hope so, Martha bit her lip. Nothing like begging. She watched him say goodbye to the man at the register as he shot out the door. A moment later, a car squealed out of the parking lot. I bet it's a date he's late for with a beautiful girl. He's not your type, Connor said. Martha jumped, her face flaming. He looked down at her and slowly shook his head. Too late. You're entranced. Mind your own business, Martha shouldered past him to the car and refused to say another word all the way home. Not that it mattered, she thought ruefully. Connor didn't say a word to her either, and it seemed to enjoy the quiet. But at least Blake was something new to think about, something to keep her mind off of the miserable predicament. As soon as she could, Martha excused herself from another disastrous dinner and went outside. The rain that had threatened all day now hung in a thick mist, blurring the outlines of the trees, muffling the world in gray. She walked slowly around the house, shivering in the dampness. Through a veiled sky, the moon struggled up through the tangled trees, its feeble light tossed by the wind. The old Bedford place. Frowning, she remembered that stricken look on Blake's face, how he'd mistaken her for someone else. Throwing a look back over her shoulder, Martha tensed at a clammy blast of cold wind. The trees rustled, limbs flailing like scrawny arms. She came to an abrupt halt at the back corner of the house and looked off into the woods. And then she felt her skin crawl. Something back there was moving. With a gasp, she stared hard at the tree line, her mind confused. There was nothing there but darkness, tight, packed darkness, and yet somehow she knew something was back there, unseen, unheard, just watching. There's supposed to be an old cemetery somewhere on the property. As Martha stared wide-eyed at the throbbing darkness, such an awful terror seized her that she thought she might be sick. And then she heard the sound, the crying. So soft at first that she thought it was the wind whining around the eaves of the old house, sighing through the dead trees, only it was so sad, so pathetic that suddenly Martha's head was full of it, the heartbreaking crying that came from nowhere and wouldn't stop. Who's there? She called. Is someone there? And the mist was so thick that she couldn't see the house anymore, or the sky, and the wind was whipping around her, echoing through the trees, louder and louder, not like crying now, like breathing. It was breathing. Martha went rigid, her heart threatening to explode. It was everywhere now, everywhere behind her, around her, and there just in front of her, where something watched, where something waited in the dark. "Oh, God," Martha whispered. "Oh," and she stood there too terrified to move, and the trees shuddered as something shifted deep within their shadows and slipped away. She felt it the second it happened, as the mist curled silently around her. Martha felt the sudden yawning emptiness where something had just been, there before her in the night. And finally she was able